Brother Bill mentioned about the directory picture update. I want to suggest another option. How about bringing in a retro picture from like 20 years ago when we weren't so old? Maybe that would be a good option too. The Widowhood Workshop Ministry is my family's passion project. It is our response to the loss of my wife, their mother, their mother-in-law, and their nana. We have 3 mottos in the ministry. One of them is on the back wall of your booth. It says, I can and I will. And you can and you will. God has given you the ability to, no matter what's going on in your life, I can and I will survive. I can and I will learn to cope. I can and I will grow. Not just in spite of what you're going through, but because of what you're going through. Always remember that by the grace of God, I can and I will, no matter what you're experiencing in your life. Another motto of the Widowhood Workshop Ministry says, don't die until you're dead. Sometimes when we have somebody in our life who dies, we die too. We opt for existence instead of life. Sometimes we may feel dead or we may want to die. Let's be honest. But we've got to get a grip and we've got to embrace what this motto incorporates. Don't you die until you're the one that no longer has a heart that's beating or blood coursing through your veins. And no matter what pain that you've experienced in your life, don't waste the pain that you have experienced in your life. Whether it's family dysfunction or a divorce or cancer or some neurological disease or financial disaster or company loss, no matter what it is, don't waste your pain. Use what you've experienced that's been so troubling, so stressful. Use it for the glory of God to try to help other people. Let me tell you about the latter part of the 1980s. It was 1989. We had been in Dover and New Philadelphia, Ohio that weekend, about 50 minutes from our home. We were there because it was Thanksgiving weekend. We went there to make sure that the kids, as well as my wife and I, got to visit with our parents and their grandparents. And we had a nice holiday visit. Saturday, we chose to come home late. That's the problem with preacher's week ending. There's always a Sunday, and you got to come back for Sunday. So we waited as long as we could and came back late that Saturday night. We were driving north on a state route. It was dark, and there was just a little bit of mist, and the road's a little bit wet. And at this certain point, we reached an intersection. An intersection where this Mennonite couple, he was a retired Mennonite preacher, very well known in the Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania area. They'd been at a wedding in Hartville, Ohio, and they were heading home. And they were traveling east, and we were traveling north. He missed the stop sign. And here we were traveling in our 1985 Pontiac Bonneville at 45 miles an hour with the freedom to go through the intersection. He missed the stop sign going east. And his 1970-something powder blue Ford Pinto was at the intersection when we were going through. As a result of that accident, Miss Eileen Burford died later that night. The car I was driving hit her side door, and she passed away in the Alliance Community Hospital in Northeast Ohio. We had to go to the hospital. My wife was injured and on crutches for a while. I was just banged up a little bit. Thankfully, the children were not injured. I had to call the elders that night and explain to them I was going to be in no condition to preach the next morning. And frankly, I don't even know what they did to take care of my responsibilities that Sunday. But I told them, before you folks dismiss, let me come over to the church building and just explain to the church what happened, because I knew what the media was going to do with that particular accident. It was at a well-known intersection where actually the civil authorities had not done a very good job in protecting the public in regard to how to handle that intersection. And when a preacher hits another preacher and a preacher's wife dies as a result of that, I knew the media was going to get a hold of that, and I thought it was important to explain to the church about what had happened that Saturday night. I was overwhelmed. I went to Eileen's memorial service. It was at the same church building where they had attended that Saturday night a wedding. And the church building was packed. It was packed because they were a well-known family, and Mr. Burford had suffered a horrible loss. I was sitting right in the middle of the auditorium. During the course of that memorial service, Mr. Burford got up and saw me, identified me by name, and asked me to stand up. And then he publicly thanked me for helping get his wife to heaven. I was overwhelmed. I didn't know how to respond to that. I went to the courthouse when he had to appear in court because of the vehicular manslaughter charge against him. And all the Mennonite people were there. I remember feeling so overwhelmed by that experience as well. You know, sometimes in life you just experience things where you just are overwhelmed by what you're experiencing. Your heart beats faster. Your emotions are in overdrive. Your thinker is not functioning normally, and you are really struggling with what you're experiencing. When our youngest daughter was 10 years old, the nurse at the youth camp where she had attended suggested that maybe we might want to have our daughter checked out because she saw some things in her that, frankly, we had not seen as parents. Ended up, she had a neurological condition. It's called hydrocephalus, excess fluid in the brain, which is a pretty normal or common thing for neurologists and neurosurgeons to take care of. And so she had a surgery to implant a valve in her head and run a tube down through her neck, down into her stomach to control the cranial pressure. The surgery was performed and we thought things were fine. 30 days later, at the post-op visit, we found out things were not fine. She was in serious jeopardy. She was diagnosed with bilateral subdural hematomas. She was bleeding in both sides of her brain. When she had the hydrocephalus, there was a cerebral aqueduct that was constricted or restricted in some way, and her brain was being pushed up against the skull. And after that brain existing like that, and then they went in there and did that surgery, the pressure was released, and then what happened was as the brain cells started receding a little bit, then blood started coming in to that area between the brain cells and the skull. She's bleeding in both sides of her brain. We ended up, by suggestion, at Rainbow Baby and Children's Hospital in Cleveland, Ohio, a part of the University Hospitals of Cleveland, a world-renowned children's hospital, where there was one and only one pediatric neurosurgeon. I didn't even know such people existed. It's a specialty within a specialty. If you know anything about that part of the country, between Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Detroit, Michigan, a densely populated part of our country, there was only one pediatric neurosurgeon. And Dr. Mapstone took our daughter under his care. During that summer, our 10-year-old daughter had 5 brain surgeries. She was in PICU, pediatric intensive care, for days. She was in a comatose-like state, not responsive in any way to physical stimuli or audible stimuli. We were scared to death. I remember one time leaving our daughter in a pre-op room, walking down a hall in that hospital, both of us crying, and my wife saying, "I never want to walk down this hallway again." And within 48 hours, we had to walk that hallway again. 5 brain surgeries. She was in the hospital for 33 days. One day, when my wife was by her side, my wife bit into a carrot. You know the crunching sound whenever you bite into a carrot and then you chew that carrot? What is that noise? Those were the first words out of our daughter's mouth as she was coming back to us from all that she had experienced. The problem was, when she came back to us, she had to learn how to walk again. She had to learn how to feed herself again. So she had months and months of physical and occupational therapy. Praise the Lord. If you were to see her now, you would never know that we almost lost her. And she was at one time in such pitiful condition. We were overwhelmed during that experience. When my wife was in her early 50s, she was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. I didn't know much about Parkinson's disease except the tremors, but she had none of those. There are about 12 to 14 different possible symptoms of Parkinson's disease, and she had them all but a couple. And one of the couple she didn't have was tremors. She lived for 8.5 years after that diagnosis, and Parkinson's disease did take her life as it finally came up into her respiratory system. And she quit breathing on December 25 of 2013 at 9:40 in the morning. During that caregiving experience, as she gradually deteriorated, no longer able to get up out of a chair, no longer able to bathe herself, no longer able to walk, no longer able to talk. During that caregiving experience, there were times I thought I was going to snap. If you know somebody who is presently doing caregiving, please love them. Please support them. Please find out what's going on in their life and find a way to effectively support them. They need help. There were times I left her presence, would go into the bathroom, and again with tears streaming down my face, I would say a 3-word prayer because that's all I could think to say. Lord, help me. I was a mess. I was struggling like I had never struggled in my life, exhausted all the time, thin-skinned. The only time in my life I went back to my high school weight of 185. There are times in a person's life where that word overwhelmed is a good description of what you're experiencing and how you're feeling. What's it mean to be overwhelmed? Well, I had a hard time finding a definition. I found a couple of synonyms, though, that help us, I think, appreciate what it's like to be overwhelmed. The word submerge is a good one. I am a weird guy. I have a dishwasher and I don't use it. I wash dishes by hand. Why do I need a dishwasher? I live by myself. I cook, but I can also clean when I want to. There are things that I'm not supposed to submerge in the sink under the water. You know, submerge when you're totally under. Sometimes you feel that way in regard to your negative circumstances. The word crushed is another synonym that some dictionaries will give you. It's when you feel that the burdens are so heavy that you feel a lot of pressure, and you feel that pressure. Sometimes it can be every day and every night, and you feel that that's being overwhelmed. Psalm 31, David felt that way. I know that because watch in your Bible or listen carefully, beginning at verse 9. Have mercy on me, O Lord, for I am in trouble. My eye wastes away with grief. Yes, my soul and my body. For my life is spent with grief, and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my iniquity, and my bones waste away. I am a reproach among my enemies, but especially among my neighbors, and I am repulsive to my acquaintances. Those who see me outside flee from me. I am forgotten like a dead man out of mind. I am like a broken vessel. For I hear the slander of many, and fear is on every side. While they take counsel against me, they scheme to take away my life. David, a great man of God, was not protected by the Lord from all of the difficulties of life. There were times in his life, and I'm not sure exactly what phase of his life that this was. I can't identify a specific time and say that's when it was that he felt like this. But obviously, it was a time in his life when he was just overwhelmed by the things that he was experiencing in his life. How in the world did that man, if he was feeling like that, how in the world did he ever survive? How in the world did he ever learn to cope? Did he ever grow through this experience? I know how because he tells me how in this very psalm. Number one, he trusted in God. That's what he did when he was overwhelmed. He trusted God. Look at the emphasis on that in this psalm. Reading from the New King James Version. In you, O Lord, I put my trust. Some translations use the word refuge. In you, Lord, I put my trust. Let me never be ashamed. Deliver me in your righteousness. Down in verse 6. I have hated those who regard useless idols, but I trust in the Lord. Then look at verse 14. But as for me, I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. Deliver me from the hand of my enemies. And then there's that phrase that we often relate to Jesus on the cross that's also in this psalm. Look at verse 5. Into your hands I commit my spirit. What does it mean to trust? Well, if you take a check to the bank and you give them your money, or you deposit any money in the bank, that's an entrustment. You're giving it to them for the care until you need to recall it. When you give your children to a babysitter, you are entrusting your children and the care of your children in every respect to that caregiver. And by the way, side note, this is free. There's no season when you need to pay for a babysitter. Now, you can call a competent teenager to do that, and that would be nice for the teenager to make a few bucks. Let me suggest to you that you check with the children's grandparents. Did you know there are some grandparents who will pay you to take on your children? I highly recommend going to the grandparents first, going to the teenagers second. But when you turn those children over to that caregiver, that's trust. Proverbs chapter 3, probably the most familiar passage in the Proverbs. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. That passage tells us what we ought to do. Trust. It tells us in whom we should trust. Trust in the Lord. It tells us how to do that. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. It tells us what that means. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him. Let him direct your paths. As a matter of fact, the plea of David in verse 3, at the end of verse 3 is, lead me, guide me. See, when you're overwhelmed, you're in no condition to be directing your own life. It is a time in your life like none other that you need to totally turn the direction of your life, the guidance of your life over to the Lord. Seek his will in your life. Don't let yourself be driven by or controlled by your emotions. Don't trust your emotions. James Dobson wrote a whole book about that question. Can you trust your emotions? He admitted in another book, Life on the Edge, after he wrote that book, he could reduce that 200-page book, Can You Trust Your Emotions, to one word: no. He didn't have to write the whole book. He just needed to give us that one word. Being overwhelmed is so emotional. It's a time to trust in the Lord. But that's not always easy to do. I'm a big fan of Lauren Daigle. I don't know what she is religiously, except I know she's a faith-based young lady who has a beautiful voice. She sings a song called Trust in You. Here's a segment of the lyrics. When you don't move the mountains, I'm needing you to move. When you don't part the waters, I wish I could walk through. When you don't give the answers as I cry out to you, I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in you. Number 2, besides trusting in the Lord, it's important for us to remember God's goodness. Look at verse 19 of this psalm. Oh, how great is your goodness. I love how that in the Bible, a lot of times when a divine characteristic is cited, there is some way that that characteristic is put on steroids. There's some sort of blow me up kind of phrase that's used to magnify it, or a word used to magnify it. Notice here in regard to the goodness. How great is your goodness. Oh, how great is your goodness, which you have laid up for those who fear you, which you have prepared for those who trust in you in the presence of the sons of men. You shall hide them in the secret place of your presence from the plots of men. You shall keep them secretly in a pavilion and from the strife of tongues. Blessed be the Lord, for he has shown me his marvelous kindness in a strong city. Marvelous kindness. Great goodness. He's that way all the time, no matter how awful our life circumstances. My kids grew up in the Smurf era. And I would watch the Smurfs with them. And the Smurfs had a couple of enemies, Azrael and Gargamel. They were awful. They were worse than the Joker in the Batman movie. Gargamel and Azrael got the Smurfs in a very serious plight. They developed a ring of fire around all of the Smurfs. They were going to become toast. But there was a smart Smurf, wise Papa Smurf, who at the time they were most threatened, cried out to the Smurfs, "Sing with me, Smurfs, sing with me." I'll not sing it. I'll spare you that ear agony. But I'll quote you the words of the song that the Smurfs sang. Goodness makes the badness go away. Goodness makes you happy every day. Badness cannot start if there's goodness in your heart. Goodness makes the badness go away. You can YouTube that if you wish. to get the melody. I'm not suggesting that focusing on the goodness of God will take away the badness in your life. But what I am suggesting is you will be more capable of bearing the burden of the badness in your life if you focus on the goodness of God, which is the source of all your blessings. And I don't care how burdened you are. If you've attended the workshop this weekend, you've heard this a couple of times before. There is nobody sitting in this room who has ever in their life or ever will be in their life more burdened than they're blessed. Every single one of us are always more blessed than we are burdened, whether we're feeling it or not. That's the facts. It's just sometimes we don't realize how blessed that we are. July the 14th of 2013, I brought my wife home from the hospital. The reason she entered the hospital just a few months before she died was because she was starving to death. She finally consented to a feeding tube. I brought her home on July the 14th. I was standing in front of the stove in the house, and I reflected on something I'd never thought about in the 6 decades of my life until that day. My wife could not eat. And I thought of all the times I had thanked the Lord for the food that we had eaten together. Never once had I ever thanked God for the ability to eat the food, or the ability to taste the food, to chew the food, to digest the food. How many blessings do we enjoy because of the goodness of God that we have never thought about and never thanked Him for? There's a book on this display table over here called 1,000 Gifts, and it's about a woman who decides that she's going to record her journey of reflecting on at least 1,000 gifts in her life. Oh, there are a lot of times, I fear, we've not thought as specifically as we should have about how blessed we are. The goodness of God is what gives us every good and perfect gift, James 1:17. There's something on my wife's memorial plate where she's buried, and it's a section of Nahum 1 verse 7. The Lord is good and a stronghold in day of trouble, and He knows those who take refuge in Him. The Lord is good. No matter how we're feeling, no matter what we're experiencing in our life, the Lord is good. Remembering His goodness can give us great strength when we're overwhelmed. Thirdly, and maybe most difficult, the end of the psalm talks about waiting on the Lord. Oh, love the Lord, all His saints. For the Lord preserves the faithful and fully repays the proud person. Be of good courage. He shall strengthen your heart, all you who hope in the Lord. Some translations say, wait on the Lord. Do you know the song, Teach Me, Lord, to Wait? Beautiful song. Oh, how we need to beg the Lord, Lord, teach us to wait. You got a problem with waiting? I have a game I play when I go to Walmart. I always look at the situation and try to pick the line that I can get through the fastest at a cashier. I never win in the game, but it's a lot of fun, and it's a humbling experience every time I go. I'll tell you when I'm going to start going through the scan and go or, the self-checkout. When they start giving me W-2 forms in January, for me doing what they should do for me, that's when I'll be a regular person to go through the self-scanning. We have a problem waiting, don't we? God operates like a crock pot, and we live in a microwave world, and therein is our problem. There are times in our lives when we're in God's waiting room and we have no earthly idea when we'll ever exit that room. Would you crack an egg in an incubator before it's time? What would happen if that cocoon were broken up too early? What would happen to that beautiful creature? There are reasons why we're sometimes in God's waiting room. We don't know why, and we don't know when, but we can surely trust. You know, if you go out to eat after we amen, and you have a waiter, by the way, last night, I highly recommend the Ice House. There is a guy there, a waiter. He was the most fabulous waiter I have ever had in my life. But do you know what a waiter does at a restaurant? A waiter serves. He was an awesome servant. Waiting on the Lord means you keep serving the Lord. It's not just sitting passively, letting time go on. Waiting on the Lord means continuing to serve the Lord, and sometimes you serve the Lord with very little understanding and a lot of questions. But there is great value that comes in waiting on the Lord. The Hobby Lobby verse in the Bible is what I call it, the last verse of Isaiah 40. I'm sure you've seen this on home interior products in Hobby Lobby. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. What a cool passage. What a neat, inspiring, encouraging passage. But sometimes sit down and go up to verse 29 to get the full impact of that verse. That is a really neat verse. But let me go up. Let's go up to 28 and start there. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, neither faints nor is weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He's creator. He's never tired. He's never weary. And he knows everything. His understanding is unsearchable. Verse 29. He gives power to the weak. To those who have no might, he increases strength. Even the youths shall faint and be weary. Young men shall utterly fall. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall walk and not be faint. Tremendous value in waiting on the Lord in troubled times in our life. Hey, I don't have all the answers. You don't have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers this side of eternity. But the Lord knows, and the Lord cares, and the Lord is an active participant in our life providentially if we are his children. And there is good reason and great motive for just continuing to wait on him, to serve him, to have our hope vested in him and in him alone. There are times in our life we feel like we're drowning. We've gone down once. We've gone down twice. And we wonder about this, could it be the third time? What we need in our life is the Lord. To me, the most powerful statement I've ever read outside the Bible, I'm about to read to you. It's from the pen of a brother named Edwin White, who was a longtime preacher in Phoenix, Arizona. A widow sent me this book, A Sense of Presence, and in that book there's this paragraph. I read this to myself periodically because I need this reminder. When we reduce life to its essentials, only one thing is needful. to have God. The noblest use of life is to spend it in the pursuit of a further knowledge of God. To use our lives in this way is to embark on a journey to find the answer to Job's question, "Oh, that I knew where I might find him." It's to begin an exciting quest that provides a lifetime of spiritual adventure. Those who pursue divine presence may or may not have quantity of years, but they will always have quality of days. If we live for this life only, for its frills and fluff, for the parting pleasures and fleeting joys, then inevitably, someday we will be frustrated with a life that hardly seems worth the price that we pay to live it. Life spent in the pursuit of baubles and bubbles ends in bitter disappointment. Baubles tarnish, bubbles burst. Do you need help? Would you like to come and share a struggle in your life and express your need for prayer? Can this body of believers help you? The answer is yes, and sometimes God's best blessings come in the form of the people in our lives. God works great things through his people. If you need some help and would like the prayers of the church here, please consider responding to the invitation. If you're not a Christian, that burden of sin does not need to be borne a moment later. That burden can be lifted because of Jesus. Those burdens are lifted at Calvary. Come be baptized into Jesus for the forgiveness of your sins if you need to. You come now while we stand and we sing.